March 23, 1943. The arid hills surrounding El Guettar, Tunisia. Sottotenente Marco Bianchi crouched behind his Carro Armato 1441 medium tank, watching through field glasses as American Sherman tanks took positions across the valley floor. His crew had been told that Italian armor could match any enemy in the Mediterranean theater. The 47mm gun mounted in his turret had proven effective against lighter vehicles throughout the North African campaign. Standard doctrine emphasized that well-trained Italian crews operating with tactical discipline could engage American medium tanks successfully. 300 meters distant, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, commanding an M4 Sherman, prepared his crew for the engagement ahead. His tank's 75mm gun represented American industrial might translated into battlefield firepower. The Sherman could unleash rapid, sustained fire that Italian tankers would struggle to comprehend. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Bianchi's gunner, Caporale Giuseppe Romano, loaded a 47mm armor-piercing round into the main gun's breech. The manual procedure required precise movements in the cramped turret space. Extract the spent casing, select the appropriate shell type from the ready rack, ram it home with careful force to avoid jamming. The loading cycle took approximately 10 to 12 seconds when performed correctly. Romano had drilled this sequence hundreds of times during training near Milan, but North African combat had revealed limitations that no peacetime exercise could replicate. Chen's loader, Private Danny Wolf, worked with mechanical efficiency refined through American mass training programs. The Sherman's turret basket rotated smoothly on ball bearings, keeping ammunition racks positioned for optimal access. Wolf could maintain 15 to 20 rounds per minute, sustained fire, his hands moving automatically between the floor racks and the breech. The difference in fire rate would determine survival in the coming engagement, though neither side yet understood the full magnitude of the disparity. The morning of September the 25th, 1942, the Ansaldo Fossati production facility in Sestri Ponente, near Genoa. Chief Engineer Vittorio Morelli watched as another M1441 rolled off the assembly line, identical to the 700 already delivered to the Regio Esercito. The medium tank weighed 14 tons and carried a crew of 4 in a hull constructed from riveted steel plates. Its 47mm Cannone da 47 32 main gun represented the pinnacle of Italian anti-tank technology developed during the 1930s. Morelli understood the tank's specifications intimately. The 47mm gun could penetrate 25mm of armor at 500 meters range when firing armor-piercing rounds. The turret accommodated 2 crew members, the commander, who also served as gunner, and a single loader responsible for maintaining ammunition supply. This 2-man turret design had emerged from Italian doctrinal emphasis on compact vehicles that could be manufactured quickly and maintained easily in field conditions. The loading procedure reflected careful engineering compromises between firepower and crew space. Italian designers had incorporated an automatic breech mechanism that ejected spent casings when the gun recoiled, eliminating one manual step from the loading cycle. The loader's position on the left side of the turret provided direct access to ammunition racks holding 87 rounds of 47mm shells in multiple types, armor-piercing rounds for engaging enemy tanks, high explosive shells for infantry support, smoke rounds for concealment. During tactical withdrawals, technical documentation filed at the Ansaldo facility specified maximum rate of fire at 6 to 10 rounds per minute in combat conditions. The figure represented ideal performance by well-trained crews operating under moderate stress levels. Field reports from North Africa suggested actual rates were often lower, as combat fatigue, mechanical issues, and tactical complications reduced crew efficiency. Morelli had toured the German tank facilities near Nuremberg in 1941, observing Panzer IV production lines, where Wehrmacht priorities emphasized different design philosophies. German tanks carried larger crews with dedicated gunners separate from tank commanders, allowing for more complex fire control procedures and potentially higher sustained fire rates. But German tanks also required more strategic, raw materials and longer production times, factors that constrained total output. Italian industrial capacity reflected the nation's resource limitations and geographic realities. The Regio Esercito needed tanks that could be built quickly using available steel supplies and transported efficiently across the Mediterranean to North African battlefields. The M1441 achieved these goals, delivering adequate armor protection and reasonable firepower in a package that Italian logistics networks could support. Testing at the Anzio proving grounds had validated the design's fundamental soundness. Crews reported that the 47mm gun provided satisfactory performance against British Matilda and Crusader tanks encountered during early desert engagements. The diesel engine reduced fire risk compared to gasoline-powered designs, while the simple mechanical systems meant that field maintenance could be performed by regimental-level repair units without requiring specialized factory-trained technicians. The limitations only became apparent when Italian tankers confronted unexpected enemy capabilities. Reports filtering back from Libya described American tanks with thicker armor than intelligence estimates had predicted. British forces were deploying new 6-pounder anti-tank guns that could penetrate M1441 armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. German advisors attached to Italian armored divisions noted that Mediterranean theater equipment standards were evolving faster than Rome's production planning had anticipated. Morelli examined the newest tanks departing for Tunisia in early 1943, knowing that Italian crews would soon face American Shermans in significant numbers. The M1441 remained fundamentally unchanged from earlier production batches, its 47mm gun and two-man turret representing design decisions made when the global war's trajectory seemed radically different. Engineering improvements would require months of retooling that Italian industry could not afford while attempting to maintain production rates. The Chrysler tank arsenal in Warren, Michigan, operated under entirely different constraints and priorities during the same period. American industrial capacity dwarfed Italy's manufacturing base, allowing Detroit's automotive giants to apply mass production techniques to military equipment on scales European factories could not match. The M4 Sherman emerged from this environment, designed from inception for quantity production and global distribution through American logistics networks. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun descended from proven artillery pieces that American ordnance departments had retooled over multiple design generations. The weapon fired projectiles weighing 6.3 kilograms compared to the Italian 47mm 1.6 kilogram shells. This weight difference translated directly into destructive impact against enemy armor and fortifications. More significantly, the Sherman's turret accommodated 3 crew members rather than 2. The commander positioned himself in the right side, elevated slightly to provide visibility through multiple periscopes. The gunner sat to the commander's left, operating the main gun and coaxial machine gun through hydraulically assisted controls. The loader worked on the left side of the turret with dedicated space and ergonomic positioning that maximized loading efficiency. American designers had studied British and Soviet tank combat reports extensively, identifying crew efficiency as a critical factor in sustained engagements. The 3-man turret allowed specialization of roles that improved overall performance. The commander could focus on battlefield awareness, target identification, and tactical communications without distraction from gunnery duties. The gunner could concentrate entirely on aiming and firing without breaking attention to load ammunition. The loader's position provided clear access to ammunition stowage, designed specifically to support rapid, sustained fire. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland had established baseline performance figures that would define American armor doctrine. Well-trained Sherman crews could maintain 15 to 20 rounds per minute during the first several minutes of engagement, drawing ammunition from ready racks positioned for optimal access. Sustained rates of 10 to 15 rounds per minute were achievable for extended periods as loaders accessed reserve stowage throughout the hull. The fire rate advantage stemmed from cumulative engineering decisions integrated throughout the Sherman's design. The turret basket rotated on precision bearings, keeping the loader's position stable relative to ammunition storage regardless of turret orientation. Shell racks were angled and spaced to allow rapid extraction without fumbling or searching. The power traverse system enabled quick target acquisition without requiring manual cranking that fatigued crews. The gyro stabilizer, though often disabled by crews who found it complicated, allowed gun laying while moving, reducing the time required to engage targets after halting. Captain James Morrison of the 2nd Armored Division had trained extensively on Shermans at Fort Benning, Georgia, before deploying to North Africa in late 1942. His crew practiced loading drills until the motions became reflexive, achieving 20-round-per-minute rates during qualification exercises. Morrison understood that combat conditions would reduce these ideal performance figures, but American training emphasized that even degraded rates would provide decisive advantages against enemy tanks with slower fire cycles. The doctrinal implications extended beyond simple mathematics of rounds fired. Higher fire rates meant American tanks could engage multiple targets in quick succession or saturate a single target area with rapid fire that disrupted enemy gunnery and increased probability of penetration. Sherman commanders could afford to take speculative shots at partially concealed targets, knowing that ammunition expenditure would not leave them unable to engage subsequent threats. Italian tankers operating under tight ammunition constraints and slower loading cycles could not adopt similar aggressive firing patterns. Intelligence reports reaching Allied headquarters in Algiers during winter 1943 provided incomplete pictures of Italian armor capabilities. British forces had captured numerous M1340 and M1441 tanks during earlier Western Desert campaigns, subjecting them to detailed technical analysis. Reports noted the 47mm guns, performance characteristic, the riveted hull construction, and the cramped crew compartments. But assessments focused primarily on armor protection and gun penetration rather than sustained fire rates, factors that seemed more immediately relevant to battlefield calculations. American tank crews deploying to Tunisia received basic briefings on enemy armor types they might encounter. Instructors described Italian tanks as obsolescent designs with limited anti-tank capability, adequate for infantry support but unable to engage modern Allied armor effectively. The guidance proved accurate regarding penetration and protection, but understated the psychological impact that fire rate disparity would have on Italian crews watching their shots bounce harmlessly off Sherman armor while taking multiple return rounds in rapid succession. Sottotenente Marco Bianchi had joined the Centauro Armored Division in August 1942 after completing officer training at the Armor School in Caserta. His instructors had emphasized aggressive tactics and bold maneuver, doctrines developed when Italian tanks faced primarily British light armor and towed anti-tank guns. The curriculum included extensive gunnery training on the 47mm gun, teaching officers to estimate ranges, select appropriate ammunition types, and direct loaders for maximum efficiency. Bianchi's crew consisted of veteran soldiers who had served together since the division's deployment to Libya. Caporale Giuseppe Romano, the loader, had participated in the battles around Gazala in spring 1942. Soldato Pietro Conti, the driver, had kept their tank running through mechanical failures and supply shortages that characterized North African operations. Soldato Angelo Rossi, the hull machine gunner and radio operator, maintained communications equipment despite harsh desert conditions that degraded sensitive electronic components. Their M1441 bore tactical markings, identifying it as Tank Number 5 in the 1st Company. The hull showed evidence of field modifications, including extra track links welded to the glacis for additional protection, and spare water cans mounted on the engine deck. These improvised improvements reflected hard-won experience from months of combat against British forces equipped with the 6-pounder anti-tank guns that could penetrate standard armor at ranges where Italian 47mm guns remained ineffective. Training exercises had prepared Bianchi's crew for engagement procedures against enemy armor. Romano could load and fire approximately 8 to 10 aimed rounds per minute under ideal conditions, though combat stress typically reduced this to 6 or 7. The rate seemed adequate during peacetime exercises where targets remained static and enemy return fire was simulated rather than real. Italian doctrine assumed that battles would be decided by first-shot accuracy and tactical positioning rather than sustained firepower exchanges. The Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942 had exposed some of these doctrinal assumptions as dangerously optimistic. Italian tank crews reported encountering American Sherman tanks for the first time, noting their thick armor and powerful guns. Initial engagements proved devastating for Italian forces, as Sherman's 75mm rounds penetrated M1441 armor at ranges where Italian guns could not achieve return penetration. The Ariete and Littorio divisions suffered catastrophic losses as Allied armor destroyed or captured more than 200 Italian tanks during several days of intense combat. Bianchi's unit had escaped the complete annihilation that befell other Italian armored formations retreating westward along the coastal road toward Tunisia. The withdrawal cost the Centauro division approximately half its operational tanks through combat losses, mechanical breakdowns, and deliberate destruction to prevent capture. Replacement vehicles and crews arrived from Italy during November and December, bringing the division back to partial strength as it prepared for defensive operations in Tunisia's mountainous terrain. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 demonstrated that Italian forces could still achieve tactical successes when operating alongside German armor and benefiting from surprise and superior positioning. The Centauro Division's infantry fought effectively during the initial attacks, with the 5th Bersaglieri Regiment capturing key American positions through aggressive night assaults. But the larger strategic situation remained grim as Allied forces consolidated their numerical and material advantages. By March 1943, the Axis position in North Africa had become untenable. American and British forces controlled access to Mediterranean shipping lanes, strangling supply lines that Italian and German armies required for sustained operations. Allied air superiority meant that daylight movements invited devastating attack from fighter bombers armed with rockets and bombs. The Italian First Army under General Giovanni Messe faced enemies to both east and west, with Montgomery's 8th Army advancing from Libya, while Patton's 2nd Corps pressed from Algeria. El Guettar represented a critical junction where roads from the interior desert met routes leading to the coastal plain. Control of the town and surrounding hills would allow either side to threaten the other's communications and maneuver. American forces had seized El Guettar on March 18th with minimal resistance, prompting German commanders to order counterattacks by the 10th Panzer Division. Italian armor would support these operations, engaging American tanks in terrain that offered both opportunities and risks. The morning of March the 23rd dawned clear and hot, typical conditions for central Tunisia in early spring. American forward observers occupying hills east of El Guettar reported enemy armor movements suggesting an imminent attack. Artillery units prepared defensive fire plans, while anti-tank guns and M10 tank destroyers moved into hull-down positions overlooking likely approach routes. The 1st Infantry Division had learned harsh lessons during Kasserine Pass, implementing improved defensive tactics that emphasized coordinated fires and prepared positions. German forces led the initial assault, with Panzer IV tanks and armored half-tracks advancing from mountain passes toward American positions. The attack achieved initial success, overrunning forward outposts and closing to within striking distance of American artillery positions. But the advance slowed when German vehicles entered a minefield that channeled movement into kill zones covered by massed anti-tank fires. The 10th Panzer Division lost approximately 30 tanks during the morning engagement, forcing a withdrawal to reassess tactics. Italian armor elements positioned to support the German attack watched these events with growing apprehension. The Centauro Division's remaining tanks included approximately 30 Me-1441s organized into 2 combat-effective companies. These vehicles represented the last operational Italian medium armor in Tunisia. Survivors of a campaign that had systematically destroyed most Italian armored formations through attrition and decisive defeats. Bianchi received orders to advance in support of renewed German attacks planned for afternoon. His company would engage American tanks reported in positions overlooking the Gafsa Road, attempting to suppress them while German armor maneuvered for advantage. The mission reflected the desperate nature of Axis operations in Tunisia, where Italian and German forces attempted to delay inevitable defeat through limited counterattacks that might buy days or weeks of resistance. Romano loaded an armor-piercing round as Bianchi's tank moved forward with its company. The formation maintained prescribed intervals, approximately 50 meters between vehicles, to prevent a single enemy shot from engaging multiple targets. Italian doctrine emphasized fire and maneuver tactics, where some tanks provided covering fire while others advanced. But the broken terrain around El Guettar complicated coordinated movements. The engagement began when American Shermans opened fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. 75mm shells raised geysers of dirt among the advancing Italian tanks. The first rounds fired high as American gunners corrected their aim. Bianchi ordered his driver to halt behind a small ridge while he assessed the situation. Through his commander's periscope, he counted at least 6 American tanks in hull-down positions with only their turrets visible above the crestline. The tactical problem was immediately apparent. Italian doctrine called for closing range to 500 meters or less, where the 47mm gun could achieve penetration against medium tank armor, but advancing across open ground under fire from entrenched enemies invited destruction. Bianchi made the decision that Italian tank commanders throughout Tunisia faced repeatedly, accepting the risk of advance because alternatives meant certain defeat through inaction. Romano fired their first round at approximately 800 meters range, aiming at the closest American tank's turret. The shell struck the Sherman's frontal armor and ricocheted skyward in a shower of sparks, causing no apparent damage. Bianchi watched the enemy tank adjust its turret bearing, the long 75mm gun traversing deliberately toward his position. Romano was already loading the second round, his hands working rapidly in the cramped space as sweat streamed down his face. The American Sherman fired before Romano could reload. The 75mm shell struck Bianchi's tank in the right sponson area, penetrating the 25mm side armor and exploding inside the crew compartment. The impact killed Conti instantly and wounded Rossi severely. Bianchi felt the tank shudder as secondary explosions from stored ammunition began cooking off, filling the interior with acrid smoke and superheated gases. Romano had survived the initial penetration, shielded partially by the turret basket's configuration. He and Bianchi evacuated through the commander's hatch, dropping to the ground and running for cover as their tank burned behind them. Around them, other Italian M1441s suffered similar fates, as American Shermans maintained steady fire. The distinctive crack of 75mm guns echoed across the valley floor, each report marking another volley from tanks that seemed able to fire endlessly without pause. Bianchi crouched in a shallow wadi, catching his breath while Romano tended to minor burns on his hands. Through the fog and dust, Bianchi could see perhaps 15 Italian tanks burning or abandoned across the battlefield. The attack had lasted less than 20 minutes, but in that brief period, American firepower had shattered what remained of the Centauro Division's armor. The rate of fire difference had proven decisive in ways that no peacetime analysis could have fully predicted. Romano had managed perhaps 4 aimed shots before their tank was hit, each round requiring 10 to 12 seconds to load and fire. The American Shermans had unleashed 30 to 40 rounds during the same period, their crews working with mechanical precision that Italian tankers simply could not match given their equipment and training. Worse still, the American tanks had not needed to advance or maneuver aggressively. They had remained in prepared positions, firing from hull-down cover that minimized their exposure while maximizing their defensive advantages. Italian 47mm rounds that did strike American armor consistently failed to penetrate, bouncing harmlessly off the Sherman's sloped steel plates. Even when Italian crews achieved direct hits, their efforts produced no results beyond cosmetic damage. The psychological impact of this firepower disparity extended beyond simple tactical defeat. Italian tank crews had trained for years, believing their equipment was adequate for Mediterranean combat. The 47mm gun had proven effective against lighter British tanks during early desert engagements. Italian armor doctrine emphasized that well-executed tactics could compensate for technical shortcomings. The reality of combat against American Shermans shattered these assumptions completely. Romano stared at his burned hands, understanding that his crew's destruction had resulted not from poor training or tactical errors, but from fundamental equipment inadequacy that no amount of skill or courage could overcome. His loading speed had been good by Italian standards, perhaps even excellent compared to average regimental performance. But excellent Italian rates meant nothing when facing American tanks that could fire 3 to 4 times faster while also enjoying superior armor protection and gun penetration. Bianchi organized surviving crew members for the walk back to Italian lines, knowing that his after-action report would document another catastrophic defeat. The Battle of El Guettar would continue for several more days as American forces pressed their offensive toward the coastal plain. But Italian armor had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The Centauro Division would be formally disbanded within weeks, its remaining personnel and equipment absorbed by infantry formations. The evening brought no respite from the harsh realities of defeat. American artillery maintained harassing fire throughout the night, while Allied aircraft struck supply columns, attempting to move under cover of darkness. Italian forces in Tunisia faced not just tactical defeat in individual battles, but the systematic elimination of their combat capabilities through attrition that accelerated with each engagement. Bianchi found temporary shelter in an abandoned farm building where other survivors from his company had gathered. The men spoke little, exhausted by combat and demoralized by losses that exceeded any previous engagement. Their tanks had been destroyed not through heroic last stands or tragic miscalculations, but through simple, overwhelming firepower disadvantage that made resistance futile from the moment contact was established. The fire rate disparity that had destroyed Bianchi's company reflected engineering and industrial decisions made years earlier in distant factories. Italian designers had created the M1441 to match their nation's manufacturing capacity and doctrinal requirements. The two-man turret saved weight and simplified production. The 47mm gun utilized existing ammunition stocks and production tooling. The compact design facilitated Mediterranean transport logistics. Each design decision made sense within its specific context, optimizing for constraints and priorities that Italian planners faced during the late 1930s. But those decisions, frozen into production tanks rolling off assembly lines in 1942 and 43, created equipment that proved tragically inadequate when confronting American armor designed under entirely different industrial and tactical philosophies. The Sherman's three-man turret, spacious ammunition stowage, and emphasis on sustained fire capability emerged from American military-industrial collaboration that prioritized mass production of reliable, effective systems over elegant technical solutions. Detroit's automotive engineers understood production efficiency and human factors engineering in ways that European craft-based tank manufacturers did not fully appreciate. The result was armor that, while not technically sophisticated by German standards, proved devastatingly effective through the simple expedient of overwhelming enemy tanks with superior rates of fire. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen's Sherman crew had expended 43 rounds of 75mm ammunition during the engagement with Italian armor. Private Wolf maintained steady loading throughout the action, his hands moving in practiced rhythm between floor racks and breech. The sustained fire rate, approximately 15 rounds per minute during the initial contact, had allowed Chen's gunner to engage multiple targets without pause, destroying 2 Italian tanks and damaging a third before the enemy withdrew. Chen inspected his tank after the engagement, noting minor damage from 2 Italian 47mm rounds that had struck the hull. Both shells had deflected off the Sherman's sloped armor without penetration, leaving bright scars on the steel but causing no functional impairment. The tank remained fully operational, requiring only ammunition resupply and routine maintenance before returning to combat readiness. The contrast with Italian tank losses illustrated the cumulative advantages that American industrial capacity provided to combat units. Chen's Sherman represented one of approximately 20,000 M4 variants produced by mid-1943, a manufacturing output that dwarfed Italian tank production. Chrysler, Fisher Body, Prest Steel Car Company, and other American firms had converted automotive production lines to tank manufacturing with efficiency that European factories could not replicate. The production disparity extended beyond simple numbers to encompass logistics, maintenance, and crew training. American armored divisions operated with comprehensive support structures, including maintenance companies, spare parts inventories, and ammunition supplies that kept tanks operational even after sustained combat. Italian armored units struggled with chronic shortages of fuel, spare parts, and replacement vehicles that reduced effective strength regardless of combat losses. Chen's crew had trained for 6 months at Fort Knox, Kentucky before deploying to North Africa. The training regimen emphasized crew coordination, gunnery fundamentals, and mechanical maintenance through repetitive drills that built automatic responses to combat situations. American training doctrine recognized that tank combat required split-second decisions under extreme stress, conditions where only deeply ingrained skills remained reliable. The loading drill that allowed Wolf to maintain 15 to 20 rounds per minute had been practiced thousands of times on training ranges. Instructors timed each loading cycle, identifying inefficiencies and correcting techniques until crews achieved optimal performance. The emphasis on speed reflected American tactical doctrine that prioritized overwhelming firepower over individual shot precision, philosophy that proved devastatingly effective against opponents unable to match American fire rates. Italian tank crews received far less comprehensive training due to limited fuel supplies, shortage of training vehicles, and compressed timelines driven by operational urgency. Bianchi's loader, Romano, had learned his skills primarily through on-the-job experience during combat operations, refining techniques under fire rather than through systematic peacetime instruction. The result was adequate performance by Italian standards, but profound disadvantage when facing American crews who had perfected their craft through months of dedicated training. The Battle of El Guettar continued through early April as American forces pressed toward the coastal plain. Italian resistance centered on defensive positions in mountainous terrain where infantry could contest American advances without requiring armor support. The Centauro Division's remaining tanks, fewer than 10 operational M1441s, were withdrawn to rear areas and eventually reassigned to other units as the division transitioned to infantry organization. General George Patton's Second Corps achieved its operational objectives by early April, linking with British forces advancing from the Mareth Line and consolidating Allied control over southern Tunisia. The victory demonstrated American military capabilities in ways that transcended simple tactical success, proving that United States forces could defeat experienced Axis formations through superior equipment, training, and logistics, even when numerical advantages were not overwhelming. American armor doctrine emerging from Tunisia campaign emphasized combined arms coordination, where tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support functioned as integrated systems. Sherman tanks provided mobile firepower that could engage enemy armor while also supporting infantry attacks against fortified positions. The 75mm guns' dual-purpose capability, firing both anti-tank rounds and high-explosive shells, made American tanks effective across multiple mission types. The rate of fire advantage proved critical in this combined arms context. Sherman crews could rapidly shift between target types, engaging enemy tanks when they appeared, then immediately transitioning to infantry support fires without delay. Italian tanks with their slower loading cycles could not adapt as quickly to changing tactical situations, limiting their effectiveness even in scenarios where their 47mm guns might have proven adequate. Technical intelligence officers from Allied headquarters conducted detailed examinations of captured and destroyed Italian tanks following El Guettar. Reports documented the M1441's specifications, noting the cramped turret, limited ammunition stowage, and basic fire control systems. Analysts calculated that Italian tanks could achieve maximum rates of approximately 6 to 10 rounds per minute under ideal conditions, compared to Sherman rates of 15 to 20 rounds per minute. The 3-to-1 fire rate advantage represented a decisive capability gap that Italian forces had no means to close. Even if Regio Esercito had ordered immediate redesign of their medium tanks, the production timeline would have required months to retool factories and begin delivering improved vehicles. Italian industry lacked the capacity to accelerate development while simultaneously maintaining existing production rates, constraints that left frontline units equipped with obsolescent designs throughout the remainder of the North African campaign. German forces, fighting alongside Italian armor, observed these disparities with growing concern. Wehrmacht officers attached to Italian divisions reported that M1441s were effectively useless against American Shermans, unable to penetrate frontal armor, and too slow firing to achieve flank hits before being destroyed. German tactical doctrine began incorporating Italian tanks as infantry support assets rather than anti-armor systems, acknowledgement that technical limitations precluded effective tank versus tank combat. The broader strategic implications extended throughout Axis Mediterranean operations. Italian armor losses in Tunisia eliminated the Regio Esercito's last significant tank formations, leaving Italian forces without mobile armored reserves for subsequent defensive campaigns in Sicily and mainland Italy. The destruction of the Centauro, Ariete, and Littorio divisions removed hundreds of trained tank crews whose experience and expertise could not be rapidly replaced. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Sottotenente Marco Bianchi survived the Battle of Guettar and continued fighting with infantry units during the final weeks of the Tunisia campaign. His experiences commanding an M1441 had convinced him that Italian tank design philosophy required fundamental revision. The 47mm gun and two-man turret reflected doctrinal assumptions that no longer matched battlefield realities, assumptions that cost Italian crews their lives when confronting more capable enemy systems. Bianchi wrote detailed after-action reports describing the engagement where his tank was destroyed, emphasizing the rate of fire disparity that prevented effective return fire against American armor. His observations reached Regio Esercito headquarters in Rome, where staff officers incorporated them into broader assessments of Italian armor effectiveness. The reports confirmed what senior commanders already suspected. Italian medium tanks had become obsolete death traps when facing modern Allied armor. Italian tank development programs in 1943 focused on improved designs, including the M1542 with more powerful engine and better armor protection, and the P40 heavy tank carrying a 75mm gun capable of engaging Allied medium tanks. But these development efforts came too late to affect operations in North Africa, where existing equipment and trained crews were being systematically destroyed faster than replacement production could compensate. The Ansaldo Fossati facility continued manufacturing M1441s through spring 1943, delivering vehicles that factory workers knew were inadequate for Mediterranean combat conditions. Production continued because Italian military logistics required standardized equipment that could be maintained with existing spare parts stocks and repair procedures. Introducing new tank designs mid-campaign would have created maintenance nightmares that Italian industrial capacity could not support. Chief Engineer Vittorio Morelli understood the bitter irony of producing tanks that were obsolete before leaving the factory. His engineers had designed the M1441 to meet specifications that seemed reasonable when formulated in 1940, when Italian armor faced primarily British light tanks and towed anti-tank guns. The subsequent evolution of Allied tank capabilities, particularly American Sherman production and deployment, had created conditions that Italian designers had not anticipated and could not rapidly address. The two-man turret that limited Italian rate of fire represented a design choice that seemed prudent when made but proved catastrophic in combat. Italian designers had prioritized compact size and production simplicity over crew ergonomics and sustained firing capability. The decision reflected industrial constraints that Italian planners faced, but also revealed doctrinal assumptions about tank combat that Mediterranean experiences had invalidated. American tank designers had made different choices, emphasizing three-man turrets and spacious crew compartments that facilitated sustained operations. The M4 Sherman was larger and heavier than the M1441, requiring more raw materials and manufacturing resources per vehicle. But American industrial capacity could absorb these additional costs, producing tens of thousands of Shermans while maintaining quality standards and delivery schedules. The cumulative effect of these design philosophies became apparent in combat statistics compiled during spring 1943. Italian medium tanks showed loss rates exceeding 70% when engaging American armor, catastrophic attrition that reflected both technical inadequacy and tactical impossibility of effective employment. American Sherman losses in tank versus tank engagements with Italian armor remained minimal, often single-digit percentages that validated American design priorities. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen participated in subsequent operations advancing toward Tunis, his Sherman crew gaining experience with each engagement. The tank's mechanical reliability impressed Chen, who had trained on earlier M3 Lee tanks that suffered chronic mechanical problems. The Sherman required routine maintenance, but operated consistently even under harsh desert conditions that destroyed less robust equipment. The 75mm gun proved effective against all Italian and German medium tanks encountered in Tunisia. Chen's gunner, Corporal Mike Sullivan, achieved multiple hits on Panzer IV tanks at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, demonstrating that American tank guns competed effectively with German weapons. The fire control systems, though less sophisticated than German designs, provided adequate accuracy for practical combat engagements. Most significantly, the rate of fire advantage allowed Chen's crew to engage multiple targets in rapid succession during confused melees, where Italian and German tanks appeared unexpectedly at close range. Wolf could maintain steady ammunition flow even when the Sherman maneuvered aggressively, the turret basket's rotation keeping his position stable relative to storage racks. This capability proved decisive in several engagements where rapid firing suppressed enemy tanks before they could effectively return fire. The psychological impact on opposing tank crews became apparent through prisoner interrogations conducted by Allied intelligence officers. Italian tankers captured after Guettar described the devastating effect of watching Sherman crews fire continuously while Italian loaders struggled to maintain even half that rate. The disparity created sense of helplessness that undermined combat effectiveness even before shells started landing. German tankers reported similar observations, noting that American Shermans could saturate target areas with rapid fire that prevented effective return engagement. Wehrmacht tactical doctrine emphasized first-shot accuracy and superior gunnery training, assumptions that proved less decisive when facing opponents who could fire 3 to 4 times as rapidly. German advantages in gun penetration and armor protection were partially offset by American numerical superiority and fire rate advantages. The Tunisia campaign concluded in mid-May 1943 with complete Axis defeat. Approximately 130,000 German troops and 120,000 Italian soldiers entered Allied captivity, representing one of the largest surrenders in military history. The captured equipment included fewer than 50 operational tanks, testament to the systematic destruction of Axis armor through sustained combat and Allied air superiority. Italian tank losses in Tunisia exceeded 800 vehicles, including all types from light reconnaissance tanks to medium armor. These Centauro division's M1441s were completely lost, most destroyed in combat, while some were abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel shortage. The few Italian tanks that remained operational when the campaign ended were scuttled by their crews to prevent capture. The destruction of Italian armor in North Africa eliminated the Regio Esercito's offensive capabilities for subsequent campaigns. Italian forces defending Sicily in July 1943 possessed minimal armor support, primarily consisting of captured equipment and obsolete light tanks. The invasion of mainland Italy in September found Italian units without significant armored reserves, constraints that contributed to rapid Allied advances during initial landings. American armor doctrine, solidified during Tunisia, evolved into fundamental principles for subsequent European campaigns. Sherman tanks would operate in combined arms teams supported by tank destroyers, artillery, and infantry. The emphasis on sustained firepower rather than individual technical superiority became central to American tactical thinking, philosophy that proved effective throughout the remainder of the war. The production advantages that enabled 15 to 20 round per minute fire rates extended beyond turret design to encompass ammunition supply, crew training, and maintenance support. American logistics networks delivered consistent ammunition resupply that allowed Sherman crews to maintain aggressive firing without rationing shells. Training programs produced replacement crews with standardized skills that maintained unit effectiveness despite combat losses. Maintenance systems kept tanks operational through systematic spare parts distribution and field repair capabilities. Italian forces lacked equivalent support structures, operating on logistics shoestrings that constrained tactical options regardless of equipment quality. Even if Italian tanks had matched Sherman firepower and protection, the absence of comprehensive support systems would have limited their effectiveness. The 6 to 10 rounds per minute rate that M1441s achieved represented not just design limitations, but also reflected ammunition shortages, inadequate crew training, and maintenance difficulties that reduced combat effectiveness. The human cost of these technical and industrial disparities remained difficult to quantify precisely. Italian tank crew casualties in Tunisia exceeded several thousand, killed, wounded, and captured, losses that represented not just individuals, but also the systematic destruction of military expertise that had taken years to develop. Training a tank crew required months of instruction and practice, investments that Italian military could not rapidly replace when experienced personnel were killed or captured. Bianchi's survival at El Guettar was statistically unusual. Most Italian tank crew members whose vehicles were penetrated by 75mm Sherman rounds died instantly or sustained injuries that prevented escape from burning vehicles. The M1441's riveted construction created additional hazards as armor penetration caused rivets to shear off and ricochet around crew compartments, inflicting casualties even from non-penetrating hits. American tank crews faced their own dangers, particularly from German 88mm guns and Panther tanks that could penetrate Sherman armor at extreme ranges. But statistical analysis showed that Sherman crews had significantly higher survival rates than Italian tankers when their vehicles were hit. The Sherman's welded hull construction reduced spalling injuries, while the spacious interior allowed faster evacuation when fires did occur. The three-man turret that enabled superior American fire rates also contributed to crew survivability by distributing combat tasks across more personnel. If the loader was wounded, the commander or gunner could potentially assume loading duties, maintaining some level of combat effectiveness. Italian two-man turrets offered no such redundancy. Any casualty reduced the tank's capability by 50% immediately. The engineering decisions that created these survivability disparities reflected broader differences in how American and Italian designers valued crew protection relative to other priorities. American doctrine treated trained crew members as valuable assets worth protecting through enhanced vehicle design. Italian constraints forced acceptance of higher crew risk as unavoidable cost of fielding any armor at all, given resource limitations. By June 1943, Italian military planning recognized that conventional armored warfare against Allied forces had become impossible given existing equipment and industrial capacity. Subsequent Italian tank development focused on self-propelled guns and tank destroyers that emphasized defensive firepower over mobile combat capability. The P-40 heavy tank program continued development but never achieved significant production before Italy's armistice in September 1943. German forces occupying northern Italy after the armistice captured incomplete Italian tanks and commandeered production facilities for Wehrmacht use. Some M1542 tanks saw service with German units, but were generally considered inferior to German designs and relegated to secondary roles. The P-40 heavy tanks under construction were evaluated by German engineers who found them inadequate compared to contemporary Panther and Tiger designs. The technological gap between Italian and American armor widened further as the war progressed. American factories introduced improved Sherman variants, including the M4A3 with higher velocity 76mm gun that matched German tank penetration at most combat ranges. The production rate of new Sherman variants exceeded 2,000 per month by late 1943, quantities that ensured American armored divisions maintained numerical superiority regardless of combat losses. Italian industry produced approximately 60 medium tanks per month during peak production periods, output constrained by limited steel supplies, shortage of skilled workers, and Allied bombing campaigns that disrupted manufacturing. The production disparity meant that even if Italian tanks had achieved technical parity with American designs, numerical inadequacy would have prevented strategic success. Staff Sergeant Chen participated in the Sicily invasion in July 1943. His Sherman crew, now veterans, with months of combat experience. The landing encountered minimal Italian armor resistance. Most defensive positions relied on infantry weapons and fortifications rather than mobile counterattacks. The few Italian tanks that did engage American forces were quickly destroyed, their 47mm guns proving no more effective than they had been in Tunisia. The rapid Allied conquest of Sicily demonstrated how complete Italian armor defeat in Tunisia had eliminated mobile defensive capabilities. Italian units fought bravely in prepared positions but lacked armored reserves that could counterattack Allied breakthroughs or provide mobile firepower during defensive battles. German forces, attempting to organize effective resistance, found themselves without Italian armored support that might have complicated Allied operations. The Italian armistice in September 1943 removed Italian forces from active combat, ending the Regio Esercito's participation in the war. Italian tank development programs ceased immediately. Incomplete vehicles abandoned in factories as German forces took control of northern Italy. The Centauro division that Bianchi had served with remained disbanded, its traditions and battle honors preserved only in historical records. Bianchi himself survived the war and returned to Milan in 1945. His experiences commanding a tank destroyed at Guettar shaped his understanding of industrial warfare and technological competition. The memory of watching Sherman crews fire continuously while his own loader struggled to maintain even modest rates remained vivid decades later. Personal experience of strategic defeat delivered through mechanical and industrial superiority rather than battlefield heroism. The M1441 tanks that survived the war as museum pieces and war memorials stood as testimony to Italian engineering efforts conducted under severe constraints. Their 47mm guns and cramped turrets represented honest attempts to field effective armor with limited resources, designs that proved tragically inadequate when confronting American industrial capacity translated into battlefield firepower. The rate of fire disparity, 15 to 20 rounds per minute for American Shermans versus 6 to 10 for Italian medium tanks, distilled complex industrial and engineering differences into simple numerical comparison. Those numbers represented cumulative effects of factory capacities, design philosophies, crew training standards, and logistics support structures. Italian tankers paid with their lives for decisions made in factories and planning offices thousands of miles from North African battlefields. The final statistics from the Tunisia campaign showed stark clarity. American armored losses in tank versus tank combat with Italian forces remained minimal, typically fewer than 10 Sherman knocked out across the entire campaign. Italian medium tank losses exceeded 800 vehicles, catastrophic attrition rate that reflected not just combat destruction, but also the systematic elimination of Italian armored capabilities through technical and industrial inadequacy. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.